Thank you all for joining us. I'm Andy Barkas, the director of the museum's Northeast region. I want to thank each of you for your generous support of the museum's mission. We couldn't do this without you. We have a very special evening planned, so please enjoy the program.
It was a cold and rainy and windy day. Looking around and seeing so many survivors and sitting right next to my dad, I could see the emotion of pride, of sadness, of humility, that they could actually accomplish this living memorial to the Holocaust.
As one who was privileged to have been present at the inception of this noble and singular enterprise, may I say how deeply grateful I am to the American people for helping us further the cause of remembrance. This impressive museum could not have been built without your understanding and generosity.
The museum's story began with the survivor generation, but it cannot end with them. My generation is carrying it forward now, and so must every generation to come. That is what this memory demands of us. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Museum Chairman Howard Lorber.
Thank you all for joining us. I have had the privilege of serving this museum over the past 4 years. In these complicated times, we're all searching for ways to promote the common good and have a sense of optimism about the future. And yet, we face a perfect storm. History education is declining as assaults against truth are rising, even in the lands where the Holocaust happened. There are more and more incidents of anti-Semitism and racism, and fewer Holocaust survivors to remind the world of their dangers. How will we meet these challenges? Education and inspiration. That's exactly what the museum is all about. An enterprise that engages educators and empowers students, giving them the knowledge and inspiration to a better future for all. They can say it better than I can. Let's hear it from them about the important impact you're making possible.
I've heard keywords and some of the same old stereotypes. Globalists or the bankers are, and then some will say something like, well, you know, the Jews are running the world. These are real stereotypes that people still believe today. I am an African-American woman. I teach Latinx students at a school that's 91% Latinx. I have always been interested in the Holocaust because I think that the lessons should continue to be taught in the school. First of all, I had to give my students the definition of anti-Semitism.
In school, that's when I had learned that there was like an actual word for the meaning of like the hate towards Jewish people.
Their communities may not even have maybe 1 or 2 Jewish people, but they're using the language that is pointed toward that community.
There's a lot of hatred in the world towards other religions and towards other people. And it escalates in a heartbeat, especially with like social media nowadays.
When my students come into the classroom and they're saying things that they've seen on YouTube or any social media, they come back and they have all of these statements and they don't know what it means, but it's really anti-Semitism in its most insidious form.
Certain terms I didn't realize were rooted in the Holocaust and hate.
Teaching students about history, teaching students about differences and the world, the universality of everyone being human and wanting to be treated with respect is something that we can learn from the experiences of others. And I think that's what the museum does. They put that into the hands of the teachers to teach it, but also then the students get a chance to use those materials to help themselves to learn more about that time period.
The Holocaust Encyclopedia on the site, different journal entries and memoirs. It really helped me connect, and it's helped me approach it with a more open mind and heart.
This is one of the 3 notebooks that I used to write my diary, which I donated to the museum. And I was hoping that this could be an educational tool that could help spread the knowledge of the Holocaust.
No mere words can accurately describe the reality of the hardships and horrors. Surely nobody can believe the SS methods if he did not feel them on his own skin. Who can feel with us? Who can understand us?
Teaching in rural Alabama, most of my students are not exposed to the Jewish culture. Most of them have never met a Jewish person. When I bring in a diary in the classroom, my students are now not only invested in the material from a learning standpoint, but now they're emotionally tied to it. It's no longer I'm learning about the Holocaust, I'm learning about Yitzhak, or I'm learning about the anonymous girl.
There's no justice in the world, not to mention in the ghetto. People are in a state of panic. In this hunger, a struggle against death from starvation. And there was a quote with her that really stuck out to me. She said, "How can you be indifferent to so much suffering?"
For so many students, that is just so crucial in being able to understand a moment and being able to access a moment, particularly if they're coming into this course without any sort of relationship with the history of the Holocaust.
There may be a diary in the archives of the museum that has the power to reach a rural student in Mississippi. There may be another diary that has the power to reach an urban student in Pittsburgh.
Teaching the history of the Holocaust offers me an opportunity to watch change in motion. It allows students really the privilege of delving into notions of humanity and responsibility, of thinking about what does it mean to be a citizen in a society.
I feel it's the most important thing is for me to not be silent and complacent, and for me to move forward thinking, who else can I share this with? How else can I use this to make a bigger and broader impact?
I see that as what I call the ripple effect. That's how we fight anti-Semitism. Hate is by creating those ripples.
A student I had years ago, he used to write swastikas on my desk. He called me the N-word to my face. And when he did that, what I said to him was, I forgive you. I forgave him not because I'm kind, but because he didn't know any better. And then I taught him.
What we just saw is successful education in action. As the granddaughter of 2 Holocaust survivors, hearing from the students who have been taught by real teachers using the tools that the museum provides made me feel the Holocaust and the lessons from the Holocaust will never be forgotten. We will continue to educate new generations across the globe. I was so impressed to learn that the museum recently hosted 2,600 teachers from every part of the country at its virtual teacher conference. The museum's greatest role is to educate the world on the lessons of the Holocaust so we can prevent and respond to modern genocides. We can only do this with your support. Our financial support of the museum is more important than ever to make its mission possible. That's why my husband Mark and I are so passionate about supporting the museum and its mission. It's our generation's time to step forward and accept this responsibility. Please give today, and please give generously. Remembering is not enough. We need to act. Thank you. And now it's my honor to introduce the director of the museum, Sara Bloomfield, and the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg. It's unimaginable that only 80 years after the Holocaust began, we are witnessing increasingly violent anti-Semitism and assaults on the truth of its history. This evening, Sara and Jeff will examine the connections between Holocaust history, anti-Semitism, and the challenges we face today in our efforts to reach new audiences amid growing social division and an erosion in the public trust. Welcome to you both.
Welcome, everybody. It's nice to be with you. Jeff, I know how busy you are. We're very honored that you could spend some time with us tonight sharing your insights. So I want to start with just an easy question to get off the bat. Let's talk about free speech. Traditionally, Jews have always done better in societies with free speech, which is one of our country's most treasured values. But social media is forcing us to kind of rethink what free speech means. And I wondered if you would share with us your thoughts on the impact that social media has had over the past decade, for better or for worse, and what remedies do you think we need to begin exploring?
Thank you for having me, first of all. So it's interesting because I think for me, the last 5 or 10 years have been an acute challenge to the way I see free speech. I always found myself instinctively on the side of the free speech absolutists on that. This is America. You get to be a Nazi. You get to march peacefully. It's horrible. It's offensive. It's terrible. But that's the price we pay for allowing us to have our free speech. What's happened in the last 5 or 10 years, I can best illustrate it by talking about what it used to be like to cover extremist groups. In the old days, meaning before the rise of the internet 20, 25 years ago, when I was a young reporter, we had, of course, extremists in America, Nazis and all the rest. And, they would gather and they would have little rallies and they would stand outside the federal building in whatever city you're in and hand out ridiculous screeds, and it was controllable. They were still dangerous people. Oklahoma City happened, obviously, but their information and the infection happened very, very slowly. What happened with the introduction of social media, with the internet and then social media, is that bad information just moves too fast to be fought. It's like a containable forest fire versus an uncontainable forest fire. And I guess I use fire on purpose because, we always understand First Amendment does not protect your right to falsely claim that there's a fire in a theater. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. At what point do we have to actually re-examine our commitment to this principle that everybody gets to say what they want when people are saying things that are getting other people killed and they're distributing them across platforms, privately owned platforms, that are not trying nearly hard enough to actually stop that hateful speech from happening? Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life Synagogue, was obviously for many of us a little bit of a hinge point. I'm not going to say a breaking point for me, but a hinge point. That was a person who was radicalized on the internet. We all know how many terrorists become radicalized on the internet. So I never thought I would be in a position where I'm questioning my absolute devotion to the idea that everybody gets to say what they want, whenever they want, and however they want.
Obviously we work so much with Germany, and I've been to Germany a lot and have many colleagues there. And Germany is a democracy committed to free speech, and yet they prohibit any speech related to Holocaust denial. And they say that, there has to be a special reason for that because of their history. So I think you can even see in that situation a country starting to rethink it before the internet. Yeah,
I remember the first time I visited Germany, I interviewed the head of their domestic intelligence agency, and they were very, very clear about Holocaust denial and very, very clear that belonging to a Nazi or Nazi-like party was illegal. It didn't ring right in my American ears, but then, you sort of put yourself in Germany's shoes. The Germans know precisely what can happen when hateful speech moves through a society like an infection unfought. That said, I think you can, by legislating against these ideas or the spread of these ideas, you probably can suppress to some extent, but you also just drive it further underground. I mean, Germany today, no one would actually say that Germany is free of anti-Semitism. So I do question, and I haven't done enough research on this to give you a firm answer, but I do question the effectiveness of laws that tell people you can't talk about this thing. Humans are humans. And especially when you declare something to be a taboo, you make it more entrancing, more exciting for people.
Look, humans are always going to be humans. Social media isn't really going to go away, even if there's improved regulation. But there's something else about social media that it works against like nuance or complexity or critical thinking or providing a historical perspective. And I wondered if you see a role for education in response to some of social media's challenges. And I'm thinking, of course, from where I sit, particularly of like history education or civics or courses on teaching media literacy, so young people can be more discerning consumers of social media.
So here, let me step back for 1 second and say that the techno-optimists who invented social media, I think many of them did and maybe still do believe sincerely that human beings are basically good, and that connecting all human beings to each other in an instantaneous fashion is ultimately beneficial to humanity, beneficial to the world. I think, you know, from a historic Jewish perspective, we understand that the creation of mobs usually hasn't worked out well for us. And what happens in social media spaces is that digital mobs are created in a very, very efficient way. All that being said, a lot of good things do happen on the internet. I think your museum is actually, I'm not just saying this because I'm with you right now, I would say it even if you weren't here. Your museum does a very effective job of communicating its mission and purpose and history across the world through the internet. And you're providing really, really carefully written and carefully edited information. So that's a good thing. That's a great thing, in fact. So there's a war going on between bad information and good information. The problem with good information is that it's harder to produce. It takes a longer time to produce it. You can write any crazy, ridiculous thing about Jews in 10 seconds on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and then it's out in the world. For you to do careful research and careful writing takes time. And of course, there are a lot of people who want the bad stuff. Obviously, education has a role. And equally obviously, or even more obviously, you can't leave the battlefield no matter what. You have to keep going. And I think institutions like yours are probably in a never-ending struggle to figure out more and more effective ways of communicating complicated truths to fight the people who are trying to sell easy demagogic answers of the sort that you see in, you know, among other things, nodes of anti-Semitic behavior on the internet.
I'm going to move on now to another favorite topic, which is Nazi analogies. Why do you think it is that Nazism is always the go-to reference to grab everyone's attention, shut down civil discourse? Why isn't it people like Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot? They each killed many more civilians than Hitler, yet they're rarely invoked.
The fact that so many people reach for Nazi analogies is actually a victory in a kind of way. It's not great when people reach in a facile way, that guy's like a Nazi, or the stuff that's going on right now, all these debates over vaccination plans, it's like it's so offensive and horrible, but it is a kind of victory for the forces of civilization, and incidentally for the Jewish people, that people understand that Nazism is a unique form of evil, and that when you're trying to condemn something as evil, you use Nazi analogies because they're most effective. To the second question, communism, especially when it manifested itself in states like the Soviet Union and like communist China today, these states are built on these noble lies. They're not about oppression or totalitarianism. They're built on equality, universal education, universal healthcare. They're promising all sorts of things that most human beings want in the world. The Nazis were promising that the Germans would rule over you. Like that wasn't a great sell, if you weren't German.
Right. And I think your point about German, ethno-nationalism, we would call it today, versus a universal idea, which communism represented, is very important. And that gets me to the next question I wanted to ask you about something that seems to be universal, which is anti-Semitism, which is so durable, so resilient. Since we're in a pandemic, we could call it a virus that just mutates and adapts itself to any kind of environment. What is it about anti-Semitism? What role does it play in so many human societies that makes it such a useful tool for people from all kinds of political and social backgrounds?
Well, it's like It's the difference between cooking from scratch and getting like Blue Apron or ordering out. It's like anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred, and it has a whole body of beliefs and falsehoods and a narrative, and they've been edited and honed, and very smart, clever, evil people have figured out the most effective delivery systems for an anti-Semitic message. So that's the first thing. The second is that Western civilization, let's just be honest here, the two daughter religions of Judaism, Christianity and Islam, both turned against, in some ways, the Jews and Judaism in order to establish their own independence, their proof that they were the succession religions to the mother religion, right? And so we've been living in for 2,000 years with this essential problem that the two largest religions in the world, which have dominated all of Western civilization, African, much of Asian civilization, especially in their older forms in Christianity, are structurally anti-Jewish. So that was a wonderful seedbed for growing anti-Semitism. But basically, it's ready-made. I mean, you wouldn't have had the Holocaust without hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of European anti-Semitism to desensitize people to the idea that Jews are humans. You don't go from 1933, where Jews are fully human in the European mind, to 1941 without having a pre-existing, anti-Semitism was a pre-existing condition in Europe. We keep going to these medical analogies, but it was a pre-existing condition, and it remains a pre-existing condition.
Right. So I'm just going to ask one final question. Just last month, we commemorated the 80th anniversary of the beginning of the mass murder of the Jews. And it's hard to believe, but in the next decade, it'll be a century since Hitler came to power. So as the Holocaust recedes in time and our country becomes much less Eurocentric, why would you tell young people, why do you think it's important for them to study the Holocaust?
The Holocaust was the breakpoint in human civilization. I mean, the Holocaust was the marriage of technology and hatred like we've never seen, haven't really seen since then. But if genocide is still a live possibility in different cultures and different countries, it means that we haven't actually learned anything about the Holocaust. We have to remind people all the time that human beings are capable of doing this sort of thing. For Jews in particular, I come back to this idea that America in some ways has been a holiday from history for Jews. I would say that if you're not armed intellectually with knowledge of the Holocaust, knowledge of Jewish history, knowledge about why America is, even today, still a unique experience in diaspora history, then you're really not prepared to confront the complexity of the world today. History has always been a problem for America. I have a friend, a Pakistani diplomat, who always says that in America is the only place in the world where the expression "that's history" means that's irrelevant. So coming back to what you do for a living and what everybody on this call is supporting, you're actually counterculture in a kind of really important way, because our culture works against memory, right? So every day that you're out there fighting that fight to educate and illuminate, it's a good day.
Well, thank you for making the case for the museum so eloquently and spending this time with us. You've given us a lot to think about.
Sara and Jeff, thank you so much for a fantastic conversation. And thank you all for being with us tonight. I hope you've enjoyed a taste of the work that your support makes possible. If you haven't made your gift, please take a moment to do so now. Thank you again for joining us. This concludes our program.